This is the ADHD Entrepreneur's Playbook, the podcast for anyone ready to embrace their ADHD and build something amazing. I'm Corey Eckert, an ADHD entrepreneur who's been through the ups, downs, and sideways pivots of hustling with a brain that doesn't like to follow the rules. Here you'll find tips, tools, and inspiration to harness your unique strengths and create the business and life you want. Let's get to work. Hey there, and welcome back to the ADHD Entrepreneur's Playbook. If this is your first time here, I'm Corey, and this is the podcast where ADHD entrepreneurs, side hustlers, and creative dreamers come to figure out how to harness their chaos, focus their energy, and build something incredible. Now let me start by saying this. If you're feeling overwhelmed right now, you're not alone. I've been there. We've all been there. Overwhelm is practically the national anthem of ADHD brains. You've got a million ideas, a dozen unfinished products, and about 3 people reminding you that you were supposed to text them back a week ago. So today we're going to talk about how to get started when everything feels overwhelming. And not just how to start, but also how to stay on track, because starting is one thing, keeping momentum is another. This episode is going to be packed with actionable tips, personal stories, and maybe a few laughs along the way. So if you're ready, let's dive in. Let's start by talking about something every ADHD entrepreneur has felt at some point, or maybe even every day, and that's overwhelm. It's that heavy, stuck feeling where your brain just can't seem to process what to do next. It's not that you're lazy or unmotivated, far from it. In fact, ADHD overwhelm often comes from having too many ideas, too many possibilities, and too much excitement all at once. I like to think of it as having the world's most powerful search engine running in your brain, but with 40 tabs open and no clear instructions on what to focus on. It's exciting, sure, but it's also exhausting. To understand why ADHD brains are so prone to overwhelm, it helps to think about how they're wired. Our brains are incredible at seeing connections and possibilities. We're the dreamers, the visionaries, the idea guys or gals, the people who can walk into a room and immediately imagine 10 different ways to rearrange the furniture. But when it comes to narrowing things down, prioritizing, or deciding where to start, that's where things get tricky. Here's what's happening on a neurological level. ADHD brains have lower levels of dopamine, the neurotransmitter that helps regulate attention and motivation. This means our brains are constantly searching for stimulation. When we're faced with a single, clear task, we can sometimes hyper-focus and get it done, but when we're faced with a long list of options, or when the task feels boring or overwhelming, our brains rebel. They're like, nah, let's scroll Instagram instead. Let me give you an example. A couple of years ago, I got this grand idea to start a YouTube channel. I was so excited about it. I had a notebook full of video ideas, I'd researched cameras and editing software, and I even sketched out a logo. But every time I sat down to work on it, I froze. Should I write scripts, film a test video, learn how to edit? Every task felt equally important, and instead of making progress, I just ended up reorganizing my desk for the 10th time. This is what's known as choice paralysis. When you have too many options, your brain can't decide what to focus on. It shuts down. It's like trying to juggle 15 balls at once. Eventually, you'll drop all of them. Another big contributor to overwhelm is the weight of unfinished tasks. ADHD brains tend to hold on to everything, every idea, every to-do list, every I should really get around to that. It's like carrying a backpack full of rocks. Each rock is a task or idea you haven't tackled yet, and over time that backpack gets heavier and heavier. I remember a time when I had at least 5 different side hustle ideas bounce around in my head: a blog, an Etsy shop, a freelance business, an online course, and why not, a YouTube channel. Instead of picking one and just running with it, I spent months feeling paralyzed by the weight of all these someday projects. I felt like I was constantly behind, even though I hadn't actually started anything yet. Then there's the pressure to do it all. ADHD entrepreneurs are often full of big dreams and big ambitions, which is amazing, but it also means we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do everything and be everything and achieve everything. And we inevitably fall short of those impossible standards. We beat ourselves up over not being good enough. And here's the thing, you're not supposed to do it all. You're supposed to focus on what matters most to you. But when you're in the middle of an overwhelm spiral, that's awfully hard to see. A big part of overwhelm comes from the idea that you need to start perfectly. How many times have you told yourself, I'll start once I have the perfect plan, or I'll start when I have more time, more money, more experience? For ADHD brains, this perfectionism can be paralyzing. We want everything to be just right, so we end up not starting anything at all. The catch is there's no such thing as the perfect start. Every successful entrepreneur I know started messy. They made mistakes, they learned from them, they kept going. Waiting for perfection is just another way to stay stuck. Now here's the good news. Overwhelm isn't a sign that you're failing. It's a sign that your brain is overloaded and needs a clear path forward. Think about it like this. If you're standing at the bottom of a staircase and someone tells you to jump to the top in one leap, you're going to feel awfully overwhelmed. But if I tell you to take it in one step at a time, suddenly it feels doable. Overwhelm happens when you're trying to leap to the top of the staircase. What we're going to do in the next segment is break it down into manageable steps so you can take that first step with confidence. All right, so we've unpacked why overwhelm happens. Now let's talk about flipping the script, because here's the thing. Overwhelm gets a bad rap. It's always painted as this big scary monster that's out to destroy us and your productivity and leave you scrolling Instagram for hours. But what if we looked at it differently? Here's a wild idea. Overwhelm isn't a bad thing at all. It's actually a sign that your brain cares a lot. Let's break that down. If you're feeling overwhelmed, it's because you're passionate about what you're doing. You've got ideas, dreams, and goals, and your brain is working overtime to try and make sense of them all. Overwhelm isn't a problem. It's actually proof that you give a damn. Think about it. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be overwhelmed. You just shrug and move on. But because you do care, your brain is firing on all cylinders trying to figure out how to turn those ideas into reality. And that's a good thing. The trick isn't to eliminate overwhelm, it's to harness it. ADHD brains are wired for creativity. We're the ones who can take a random spark of inspiration and turn it into something amazing. But sometimes that creativity runs wild, and instead of focusing on one idea, we end up juggling 20. Does that sound familiar? So overwhelm is just creativity in overdrive. Your brain is throwing out possibilities faster than you can catch them, and some of them are hitting you in the face and falling on the floor, which is why it feels a little bit chaotic. But that chaos is where the magic happens. The goal isn't to stop the chaos, it's to channel it. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you've got a fire hose blasting water everywhere. It's powerful, but it's also all over the place. Now imagine attaching a nozzle to the end of that fire hose so you can aim it in one direction. Same power, but now it's focused and effective. That's what we're trying to do with your creative overwhelm. Turn it into focused energy. Here's another mindset shift. Overwhelm isn't a weakness. It's your brain's way of showing you just how capable you are. If you've ever thought, why can't I just pick one thing and stick with it? Let me tell you something. That ability to think in a million directions at once is a superpower. It's what makes you innovative, resourceful, and adaptable. But superpowers need training, right? Spider-Man didn't wake up one day and just know how to shoot webs out of his hands. He had to figure it out. And that's what we're doing here. We're learning how to train your brain to work with you instead of against you. One of the biggest traps we fall into, especially as ADHD entrepreneurs, is the belief that we need to have everything figured out before we start. We tell ourselves, I'll start when I have the perfect plan, or I'll start when I feel ready, or I just got to get this logo done. But the truth is, you're never going to feel ready, and you don't need the perfect plan to take the first step. Progress isn't about getting it right the first time. It's about taking that messy, imperfect action and figuring it out as you go. Here's a quick exercise for you. Next time you're feeling stuck, ask yourself, what's the smallest thing I can do right now to move forward? Maybe it's jotting down a rough idea, sending an email, or even just opening your laptop. The goal isn't to finish the whole project, it's to create momentum. I want you to think of overwhelm like a light bulb that's too bright. All that energy is there, it just needs something to direct it. That's what this mind shift is all about. Learning to see your overwhelm as energy that's waiting for direction. Instead of saying, I'm so overwhelmed, I can't do anything, try saying, I've got a lot of energy here. What's the best way to use it? It's a subtle shift, but it makes a huge difference. Here's an example from my own life. When I first started my eBay reselling business, I felt like I needed to learn everything at once. How do I source inventory, take photos, write descriptions, ship products, you name it. There was a million things on my plate. The overwhelm was real. But instead of letting it paralyze me, I decided to channel that energy into one thing, listing my first item. That one action gave me the confidence to tackle the next step and the next. Here's a final thought for this segment. Overwhelm isn't something to fight. It's something to celebrate. It means you're alive, you're creative, and you're invested in what you're doing. The next time you feel that wave of overwhelm coming on, try this. Take a deep breath. Write down 3 reasons why you're excited about your project and remind yourself that this overwhelm is a sign of your potential, not your failure. Because the most successful entrepreneurs aren't the ones who never feel overwhelmed. They're the ones that learn how to work with it. And that's exactly what you're doing. So we've now reframed overwhelm as a good thing, proof that your brain is creative and full of potential. But now comes the hard part. What do you do with all that energy and all of those ideas? How do you take that chaos and turn it into focused action? And the answer is simple, but not always easy. You pick one thing. Now I get it. For ADHD entrepreneurs, picking one thing feels impossible. You've got a million ideas and all of them are exciting, and you don't want to let any of them go. But we already know that trying to do everything at once is the fastest way to do nothing at all. So the secret to making progress is learning to narrow that focus. But before you can pick one thing, you need to get everything out of your head. Why? Because your brain isn't designed to hold 1,000 ideas at once. It's like trying to carry every grocery bag in the house in one trip. You're going to drop something. And that's where the brain dump comes in. This is your chance to unload all those ideas, tasks, and to-dos that have been bouncing around in your head. Grab a notebook, a whiteboard, or an open document. It doesn't really matter. Just start writing. No structure, no filters, just get it all out. And I do mean everything. Side hustle ideas you've been thinking about, tasks you've been avoiding, projects you're excited about, random thoughts that have been taking up brain space. Think of it as decluttering your mental attic. You're not trying to organize yet. You're just making space to breathe. Once you've got everything out of your head, it's time to narrow it down. This is where a lot of people get stuck, so let me make it super simple. Your goal isn't to pick the perfect thing here. It's to pick something. Look for patterns. As you review your brain dump, you'll probably notice some reoccurring themes that stand out. Maybe a few tasks feel urgent or particular projects get you excited just thinking about it. Ask yourself, what matters most right now? Not everything on your list is equally important. Focus on what's going to make the biggest impact or bring you the most satisfaction this very moment. Choose one thing to start with. That doesn't mean you're abandoning the rest. It just means you're giving yourself permission to focus on one thing for right now. The rest will still be there when you're ready. If you're struggling to narrow down your focus, try the gut check method. First, look at each item on your list and ask yourself, does this excite me, stress me out, or feel neutral? Next, circle all the things that actually excite you. These are the ideas or tasks that align with your passion and energy. And finally, pick one of those circled items as your starting point. And this isn't about logic. It's about listening to your instinct. If something feels exciting, that's your brain telling you it's worth pursuing. Here's the good news. Picking one of those things doesn't mean you're locked into it forever. As ADHD entrepreneurs, we thrive on variety, and that's fine. You're allowed to pivot if something isn't working or if your interests change. Think of it as an experiment, not a lifelong commitment. Your job right now is to focus on one thing long enough to see progress. If you decide later it's not the right fit, you can always adjust. So let me give you another example from my own life. A while back, I was juggling a dozen different ideas, an online course, a blog, a freelance project, and about 5 other things that I won't even bother listing. Every time I tried to work on one, I'd get distracted by another. It felt like I was trying to chase 5 squirrels at once. So I did a brain dump. I wrote down every single idea, task, project that was taking up space in my brain, and then I asked myself, what's the one thing I could do right now that will make the biggest difference? For me, the answer was clear. I needed to focus on finishing my blog. That one decision made it easier to tune out all the noise and get to work. And something magical happens when you start picking one thing. It creates momentum. When you stop trying to juggle everything and focus on one task, you're able to make real progress. And that progress builds confidence and a feeling of accomplishment, which makes it easier to tackle the next step and the next. Remember, you're not trying to finish everything at once. You're just taking the first step, and that first step is where the magic starts. All right, so you've picked your one thing, and that's a big step, so congrats. That's a huge step. But let's be real. Even after narrowing your focus, that one thing can still feel massive. Starting a blog looks simple, but that's a lot of work. Launching a side hustle? Where do you even begin? And this is where the overwhelm likes to creep back in, whispering, "You're never going to get all this done." But not today. Because today we're going to talk about how to break your big ideas down into little steps, so small they're almost impossible to ignore. ADHD brains love complexity. We thrive on ideas and connections and creativity, but when it comes to execution, That's where things get a little bit sticky. Big, vague tasks like build a website, start a blog, or start a podcast are overwhelming because your brain doesn't even know where to begin. Breaking it down turns that mountain into a series of tiny, manageable hills. Instead of staring up at this impossible task, you're taking one small step at a time, and each step gets you closer to the top. So I'll give you a secret. The smaller the task, the more likely you are to do it. And I'm talking laughably small, like write one sentence or open a new document small. I'll give you an example. Let's say your big goal is to start a blog like I was doing. That's a huge undertaking, right? But what if I broke it down like this? Brainstorm 3 potential blog post ideas. Pick one topic from that list and write the first sentence on your post. That's it. You're not trying to write the whole blog post or plan an entire content calendar. You're just focusing on one tiny piece. And once you finish that piece, you'll have the momentum to tackle the next. So here's a simple process to break your one thing into manageable steps. Number one, start with the end goal. What does success look like? Is it launching your first product? Is it publishing your first post? Is it making your first sale? Define it really clearly. And number two, work backwards from there. Once you know your end goal, map out the major steps you need to take to get there. For example, if your goal is to launch an Etsy shop, your big steps might include creating a shop name, designing a logo, and listing your first product. And that brings us to number three, shrink each one of those steps and break them down into smaller bite-sized tasks. For example, list your first product might turn into take 5 product photos, write a 2-sentence description, or research shipping options. The key here is to keep shrinking the steps until each one feels easy and approachable. When you start breaking down things in this way, it creates what I like to call micro wins. Each time you complete a tiny step, your brain gets a little hit of dopamine, a reward that says, hey, you're doing great, keep up the work. These little micro wins build momentum. They turn a daunting project into a series of small victories, and before you know it, you're making real progress. Now, even with the best intentions, there are going to be times when you stare at that list and think, I don't even know where to start. And when that happens, here's what I'd recommend. Start by picking the easiest task. Look at your list and choose the steps that feel the most doable, something you can complete in 5 minutes or less. Then time yourself. Set a timer for 10 to 15 minutes and commit to working on that one task until the timer goes off. Sometimes just starting is enough to get your momentum back. And if all else fails, ask for help. If you're stuck on a specific step, reach out to someone who might have the answer. A friend, a mentor, a community, or even a quick Google search. Remember, the goal isn't to conquer the entire list. It's to take one small step forward. One of the biggest misconceptions about breaking tasks down is that it's somehow settling or not ambitious enough. But starting small is how big things get done. Eating an elephant one bite at a time, so to speak. All right, so you've picked your one thing, you've broken it down into manageable steps, and maybe even tackled a few tasks. You're on a roll, or at least you were, but then life happened. Maybe it was an unexpected obligation, a lack of energy, or that sneaky urge to binge watch a show you've seen 3 times already. Whatever the reason, you lost momentum. First off, let me say this. Losing momentum is normal. It happens to everyone. Yes, even the most disciplined, put-together entrepreneurs you see online. The difference between the people who make progress and the people who stay stuck isn't whether they lose momentum. It's how they get it back. So let's talk about how to do that. The first thing you need to do when you've lost momentum is let go of the guilt. Seriously, stop beating yourself up about it. ADHD brains have enough internal critics without you piling on. Here's the thing. Feeling guilty about what you haven't done doesn't help you get anything done. In fact, it usually has the opposite effect. It keeps you stuck. Instead of focusing on what you didn't do yesterday, focus on what you could do today. Progress isn't about being perfect. It's about getting back on track when things go off course. When you're feeling stuck, one of the most powerful things you can do is reconnect with your why. Why did you start this project in the first place? What's the bigger picture you're working on? For me, my why is almost always tied to freedom. Freedom to work on my own terms, create things I'm passionate about, and build a life that aligns with my values. When I lose momentum, revisiting that vision reignites my motivation. Here's a quick exercise you can do right now during this podcast. Take 5 minutes and write down your why. Be as detailed as possible. Is it about financial independence, creating a better future for your family, proving to yourself you can actually do hard things? Maybe it's even simpler, and your why is just to be able to afford that new flat screen TV so you can stream Monk on repeat. Whatever the reason, keep that why somewhere visible, on your desk, your phone, or wherever you see it often. Sometimes all you need is a reminder of why you started. Sometimes the problem isn't the task at all, it's your surroundings. If your workspace feels cluttered or distracting, it's going to be harder to focus. That's why a quick reset can make a huge difference. I actually have a reset routine for when I'm feeling stuck. I clear off my desk or workspace. Even just tidying up a bit can create a sense of calm. If that doesn't do it for you, you could change locations. If I've been staring at the same spot for hours, moving to a different room or even a coffee shop can help me reset my brain. You could even try setting the mood, light a candle, play some music, or do whatever makes your space feel inviting and energizing to you. Sometimes a fresh environment is all you need to jump back in. And here's a trick you can use. Treat that reset as a task, one small achievable thing, and celebrate it when you've accomplished it, just like you would if you had accomplished any other task on your to-do list. Celebrating these small wins actually reinforces the habit of getting back on track, which makes it easier to do the next time. So we've talked about how to pick your one thing. We've talked about how to break it down and get back on track when you lose momentum. But here's the thing, consistency doesn't just happen. For ADHD entrepreneurs, it's about creating boundaries and systems that work with your brain, not against it. And boundaries can feel restrictive at first, like you're boxing yourself in. But let me flip that idea for you. Boundaries aren't about limiting yourself. They're about creating space to thrive. Think of them as guardrails on a winding mountain road. They're not there to restrict your adventure. They're there to keep you from flying off the cliff. Let's dive into a few ADHD-friendly boundaries that can help you stay focused and keep moving forward. Here's a game changer. Timers. ADHD brains love urgency. I'm convinced it's why I'm always procrastinating everything until it's an emergency. We tend to work well under pressure, and timers create just enough pressure to make even the most boring tasks feel like a challenge. It's like turning your work into a race against the clock. One method I swear by is the Pomodoro technique, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but I hope I am. But here's how it works. Set a timer for 25 minutes, focus on one task until that timer goes off, and then take a 5-minute break. The beauty of this method is that it breaks your work into bite-sized chunks. You're not committing hours of focus, just 25 minutes at a time. And if 25 minutes feels too long, try starting with 10 or 15. The point is to make it doable. Giving yourself breaks is another boundary I like to set. Something a lot of entrepreneurs forget is that breaks are productive. ADHD brains can only sustain focus for so long before they hit a wall. Pushing through that wall doesn't lead to better work, it leads to burnout. The trick is to take breaks before you hit the wall. Build them into your schedule as non-negotiables. For example, after 25 minutes of work, take that 5-minute break. After 2 hours of deep focus, step away for 15 to 30 minutes. Use your breaks to recharge, stretch, grab a snack, or step outside for fresh air. And if you're feeling guilty about taking a break, remind yourself that the reset is part of the process. It's what allows you to come back stronger and keep coming back. A third boundary is simply allowing yourself to say no. ADHD brains love to say yes to everything. New projects, spontaneous plan, random distraction. But every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. Protecting your time means learning to set boundaries with yourself and with others. Try scheduling deep work blocks. Dedicate specific times of the day to focused work and treat those blocks like sacred appointments. Say no when necessary. It's okay to turn down invitations or opportunities that don't align with your goals. And turn off your notifications. During your deep work blocks, silence your phone, close the unnecessary tabs on your computer, and put distractions on hold. Every time you get sidetracked to answer a text from your brother-in-law that could have waited, you have to waste time trying to refocus on your given task. Your time is your most valuable resource, so you need to treat it like gold. Another boundary, and this one's a bit of a paradox, ADHD brains need structure, but they also need flexibility. Too much rigidity can feel suffocating, while too much freedom could lead to chaos. The sweet spot is creating structure that leaves room for spontaneity. So instead of saying I have to write from 9 a.m. till 11 a.m., say I'm going to write for an hour at some point today. This gives you the freedom to work when you feel most energized while still maintaining a sense of accountability. The goal is to create a system that supports your brain's natural rhythms rather than forcing it into a box. We don't do well with boxes and rules, remember? And finally, as I've mentioned before, celebration. ADHD brains thrive on positive reinforcement, so it's important to acknowledge your wins, no matter how small they seem. Finished a task? High five yourself. Stuck to your timer schedule for a day? Treat yourself to your favorite coffee. Cleared out your workspace? Bask in the glow of your organized desk. Celebrating the small wins not only feels good, it trains your brain to associate progress with positive outcomes. And the more you celebrate, the more motivated you'll feel to keep going. All right, we've covered a lot today, so let's take a moment to recap and tie it all together. We started about talking about why ADHD brains feel so overwhelmed and how to reframe that chaos as a sign of creativity and passion. Then we tackled the mindset shift that you need to start seeing overwhelm as energy waiting for direction. From there, we got into the nitty gritty. How do we pick one thing to focus on? How do we break your big ideas into laughably small steps? And what to do when you lose momentum? And finally, how to set ADHD-friendly boundaries that work with your brain, not against it. Each of these steps builds on the last, creating a roadmap to help you turn chaos into progress, your ideas into action, and your dreams into something real. But none of this works unless you take the first step. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be huge. It just has to be something. So here's my challenge to you. Pick one thing from today's episode that resonated with you. Maybe it's doing a brain dump to clear your head, breaking down the next task into micro steps, or setting a timer to get started. Whatever it is, commit to doing it today. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Because the hardest part is always starting. But once you take that first step, the rest gets so much easier. Now, before we wrap up, I've got a little invitation for you. If you've got a question about ADHD, entrepreneurship, side hustles, or anything at all, I'd love to hear it. Head over to sidehustlestrong.com and submit your question. Whether you're stuck on something specific or just curious about a topic, your question could end up on a future episode. Plus, it's a great way to connect and share what's on your mind. I'll drop a link for you in the description. Okay, that's it. I know your time and energy are valuable, and the fact that you chose to spend some of it with me today means the world. I hope today's episode gave you a little clarity, a little inspiration, and maybe even a laugh or two. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you hit subscribe and don't miss what's coming next. I've got some amazing topics lined up, and I can't wait to share them with you. Until next time, keep leaning into your superpower. You're capable of more than you think, and I can't wait to see what you create. Let's get to work.